Thank you very much for joining, and welcome to this new SubQuery Sessions Twitter Spaces. Really looking forward to this one. We're going to be talking about decentralized exchanges, and today we're very lucky to be joined by THORchain. My name is James Bailey, by the way. I'm the CEO of SubQuery. I'm really happy to be able to talk to you this morning. But we have also here familiarcow from THORchain. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm familiarcow. I'm the communications director of Nine Realms, and Nine Realms is you can think of it like consensus, but for Ethereum is Nine Realms to THORchain. We do a lot of public infrastructure, software development. There's Pluto joining right now, but just generally making public works for the THORchain ecosystem and building infrastructure for THORchain itself, which is obviously one of the largest uh, native asset decentralized crypto exchange infrastructure. So that is the goal of THORchain, and that's how Nine Realms contributes to THORchain. And now Pluto is here.
Hey everybody, what's going on? Sorry, I was just running a little bit late. I had to re-download Twitter to my phone. I'm actually taking a bit of a social media break, so I realized, I don't even have the app. So I just had to go through all that. But
Good job.
But yeah, so yeah, I'm Pluto. Thanks for the intro, familiarcow. I work on the Nine Realms team, doing everything from developing the core protocol to helping run some of the infrastructure on the Nine Realms side. Security is a big one. Yeah, most recently, I'm sort of taking responsibility for the battle testing and go live of our lending feature, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, happy to answer any questions and talk about our experience integrating with SubQuery today. And excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us, Pluto. And I completely get your social media. I'd like to also have a little bit of a detox over this holiday period. Maybe I will. But no, thanks for joining us today, guys. And firstly, the topic of this conversation is why should you use DEXs or decentralized exchanges instead of CEXs? Maybe we could start with for those that don't know. Maybe we can start with what is THORchain, why is it unique, and give us a bit more background about the thoughts behind or the thinking behind the genesis of THORchain.
I can take that one. Feel free to jump in anytime, familiarcow. But
Sure.
yeah, so THORchain is essentially the world's first, and to my knowledge, only fully decentralized cross-chain DEX. So what that means, and how it's different from something like Uniswap or SushiSwap, those are essentially smart contract-based decentralized exchanges that sort of leverage the Ethereum compute layer as a means to essentially allow someone to do a swap between two assets. So because both of those assets exist on the Ethereum network, because the Ethereum network guarantees, how smart contracts compute, it's essentially a deterministic state machine. So we can deploy a smart contract onto the Ethereum network, take advantage of the security guarantees that Ethereum enables, and use that to facilitate swapping of assets across a pool. And that's how something like Uniswap works. And so what THORchain is it's fundamentally different in the sense that it essentially knows all of the state of every chain that it's integrated with, and it reports back the state of those chains to THORchain. So THORchain is its own sovereign chain. It runs on Cosmos, on Cosmos SDK, kind of like Osmosis, and it borrows from some of the more well-established patterns of decentralized exchange, like automated market makers, where essentially you can price any asset along a curve. There's essentially people who provide liquidity to the pair, and then there's takers of that liquidity who are essentially willing to accept any price along that curve. So if you're familiar with the concept of Uniswap and SushiSwap, you should be familiar with the concept of THORchain. How its liquidity pools work under the hood is very similar. The only difference is that THORchain is truly cross-chain in that we are observing the transaction state on Bitcoin, observing the transaction state on Ethereum, Litecoin, Dogecoin, Binance chain. So we're compatible with everything. We're compatible with UTXO chains like Bitcoin. We're compatible with Cosmos or BFT chains. And we're also compatible with EVM chains. So it's fundamentally different in its architecture, but you can really just think of it as Uniswap that allows you to swap Bitcoin for ETH, for example.
Yeah, I like to think of the TLDR of THORchain is it just lets you swap like you would on a centralized exchange, but with the self custody of a decentralized exchange. So you have native Bitcoin, you want to switch to ETH. What are your options right now? You could give it to BitGo, and you could wrap it for wrapped Ethereum. You could send your Bitcoin to a centralized exchange like Binance or Coinbase, and then have them switch it to ETH. Both of which are more centralized solutions. Then there's THORchain, which is kind of the is the most decentralized solution out of all of these, where your coins go in, THORchain makes an observation, say, hey, we just got these coins, we need to send out coins on another chain, and it just automates that swap process. So THORchain is just the infrastructure that kind of makes that cross-chain trading easy and takes out a lot of the trust assumptions that you would find when you're trading on a centralized exchange or using a bridge or something like that. So it's just this base layer infrastructure that works with the lowest level of assets. There's the regular base chain assets like Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain, ETH on the ETH chain, and all the other assets that THORchain supports, and just makes it easy to integrate into multiple different blockchains using THORchain's infrastructure. So hopefully that was a good explanation on what you can do with THORchain and what exactly it does.
Yeah, very in depth. And I'm curious for you, Pluto. Like, obviously, you've been a security engineer at THORchain. Running a DEX or even specifically running a bridge, because you still bridge assets across these different chains, right? You're connected deeply to many different chains out there. There's a lot of security risks around having that bridge because you have to kind of lock up those assets in different chains, right? What kind of processes do you guys go through when you're building THORchain to make sure that things are kind of rock solid?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and like we can talk about high level what is the economic security of THORchain, and then we can get into like what are the more technical security measures that THORchain takes. So from an economic from an economic security perspective, what you have to understand is that there's Rune is essentially the native asset of the network, and Rune is used as basically as the asset pair against every other asset, right? So instead of having like a BTC ETH pool on THORchain, you have a BTC Rune pool, and then you have an ETH Rune pool. So every asset for however much of the L1 asset, so say there's $10 million worth of Bitcoin, there also has to be $10 million worth of Rune in that pool. And then to facilitate a swap between Bitcoin and Ethereum, what you're actually doing is you're telling it, I'm sending Bitcoin in, I want ETH back. Under the hood, it's just swapping across those two pools with the native asset as Rune. So it's really important to understand sort of Rune's role in just the entire like liquidity pooling process. And then so for every dollar of capital of exogenous capital, whether that's Bitcoin or Ethereum, there has to also be $1 bonded to the nodes that run the network. And that's a minimum of $1 bonded. And the optimal state is $2 bonded. And anytime that you're not in that optimal state, the way that the system favors essentially like liquidity incentives is more in favor of the node operators when you're running at an underbonded state. So essentially, and within that validator set, everyone essentially everyone is a signer in a threshold vault. We use what's called TSS vaults, which are essentially were a major breakthrough in cryptography, and it's the only reason why something like THORchain is possible, and it's also the only reason why something like THORchain was not attempted, as early as 2017, 2018, when you saw, AMM-based DEXs on EVM chains like Ethereum coming out. There's a reason why, people basically said, look, this is a great idea, this whole AMM thing. It means that people can like passively pool in and then allow people to swap at any point in time, as opposed to some of the other like atomic swapping solutions of the time. Like, for example, AirSwap, you had to, which was like one of the first DEXs ever. On AirSwap, you had to like have makers and takers, and the makers had to be online responding to requests in real time, and then they would basically have to give a quote back and then sign the transaction and send it over to the taker for them to then sign their end of it and then submit that to the Ethereum contract layer to perform the swap. So this idea of having always online liquidity was a really hard thing to do. And what THORchain figured out was how to store liquidity online 24/7 across these vaults that are controlled by all of the validators in the validator set. So those validators are not only signing transactions to determine what the state of the different chains are, but it's also signing funds out of its vaults. And so the core idea of having this bond that you have to put up ensures that if any one node tried to do something sneaky and say, hey, actually, I think we should sign out all of these funds to this other address. All the other nodes don't have consensus on that, and so what they would do is they would slash that person's bond. So there's an actual there's capital at risk to becoming a validator on THORchain, and that is and the core assumption is that there is at least $1, if not $2 at risk for every dollar that you're securing. Therefore, it would never be in any of the validator's best interest to steal from the vaults, because they would end up with less capital than they had to bond into the system. So that is like kind of the economic security of THORchain, and it's something that it makes THORchain fundamentally capital inefficient, right? So we have an exchange, for example. They don't have to put up any bond. The exchange itself is not putting up any, or users aren't putting up any money saying I'm guaranteeing the client funds. You're just, the only guarantee on a centralized exchange is the word of the founder and of of every software engineer on those teams. I mean, it's not even like just founder risk at that point. Anybody from the security team who has access to like the keys could just sign your funds out, right? And so those people didn't have to put up money to get that position. They just had to have like a good resume, right? So that's what you're trusting in a centralized exchange, is that this group of people or this organization is trustworthy. And that's simply not how THORchain says that's not good enough. THORchain says we need you to put up $2 of capital for every $1 of pooled liquidity. And if any of you guys decide to get together and basically collude, then you're just going to lose more money than you put into the system. So it's from its very conception. We think about the game theory of like of collusion, of basically of people being able to Sybil attack the network, right? So how much would it take to essentially gain a majority, and then be able to do things like that? And so, yeah, that THORchain is just like, in its economic security alone is it's just a fundamentally better thing, right? We can see how much is in the vaults at any given time. We can also see how much is bonded in THORchain at any given time by all of the nodes, and you can clearly see.
And everyone else can see that as well, right? Everyone else as well can
exactly.
do that.
So
see it all
THORchain, it's not like we have to scramble to do proof of reserve audits and get and then there's auditors who say, oh, we don't want to do crypto audits, or you as a crypto company says, we'll do an audit, but this is the methodology that we want the auditor. No, everything is on chain. You can see the balance of every single every single, like it's crazy the way these vaults work. We have one set of keys. Actually, there's multiple different vaults that that like in order to sort of shard the network, we have like 20 validators will be in this vault, 20 validators will be in this vault, and then within that, it's like a 13 of 20 multi-sig that everyone has to kind of agree on. So there's like there's different things that we do to make the system more performant. But you can think of this vault essentially as having a key that can be used on every single network. So like it has its own BTC address, it has its own Ethereum address, and then it can sign funds out of there. And so anyone can go and audit both what our liabilities are, which is what we owe to depositors in the form of like their L1s that they pool in the system, and then you can see what our assets are, and in the form of balances held on chain at our addresses. And another security feature, which I can't take credit for, but is genius, is the fact that we churn the funds. So it's proof of liveness, meaning every 3 days we're rolling all those keys over and all those funds over. So by signing out all of the money in the vaults to a new vault and then using that new vault and taking that over, we allow the validator set to essentially have a competition. So people are bidding for that slot in the validator set, and the lowest bidder will always get churned out. So it creates a natural incentive or mechanism to drive up the amount of bond and increase the security of the network. But it also it's a constant proof of liveness. And so that's something that you'll see when you see like a centralized exchange do an audit. They'll basically the auditors will require the exchange to do a transaction, to send how much money they think they say they have. They'll require them to like quickly send that back and forth from one address to another to prove that they actually have control of the funds, right? Because anyone can point to an address and say, oh, these are our funds on chain, just go look there. But you also have to prove that you are in control of it and that you have liveness on that. And so that THORchain does that just by default every 3 days.
That's quite interesting. That's a pretty cool ability to really proof that. And then, nowadays it's been a really bad period of the past month or so to be a centralized exchange. It seems like everyone's absolutely concerned about the assets in them. Obviously, there's the old statement, not your keys, not your crypto. Are you seeing a huge amount of interest in THORchain right now? Is like people looking for an alternative just to be a bit more safe out there?
Yeah, I think in the past month, people are seeing the value of THORchain a lot more, because it's not just this single chain AMM that you can swap these low liquidity tokens in. This is the only real live exchange that you can use to swap things that you'd swap on a centralized exchange, like Bitcoin, which is like by far, like far and away, order of magnitude, well, maybe not that much, but the largest market cap in demand coin for trading, and yet it's not available on any decentralized platforms unless you're using something like a bridge and wrapped assets, right? Like that's what most of the industry is using right now, and people are realizing that really the only way to secure these assets is to use real native coins, Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. When FTX blew up, I saw so many people being like, "Oh wow, they only had like a couple thousand Bitcoin. They only had like 2,000 or 3,000 Bitcoin or something like that." I'm sure, and hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin of liability, which they had to pull from their other assets. THORchain has all the actual Bitcoin really there on chain, secured by these things. And a lot of what Pluto was just talking about is just like really interesting in THORchain's design. But THORchain's design from the beginning was designed to figure out how do you secure these native assets with a anonymous set of custodians, because THORchain is obviously meant to be this decentralized network where anyone can be one of these validators that help secure these vaults. So the whole design of THORchain really started from, how do you secure these assets? How do you secure Bitcoin with an anonymous group of people? How do you create the incentives to make sure that people not
right?
Because
there's no smart contract,
yes.
Right? There's no smart contract that you can just say, hey, this contract provides the security. You have to then say, we have to give servers, we have to give people like individual validators the ability to provide that security. So that was
Yeah,
cool.
so the model that was created of bonding and also pairing liquidity against Rune is actually what creates that security for the Bitcoin. So you can actually ensure that any kind of economic attack on THORchain wouldn't actually work, and that any kind of attacker that tries to steal the Bitcoin is losing more capital than they're putting up in the first place. So it's designed from the first principles, starting with that first question: how do you custody Bitcoin between a large anonymous set of people who can freely enter and leave? Uh, so that's how THORchain was originally designed, and that's like where it was built from to get to like where it is today.
Yeah, that was your original kind of your original play, right? Was you are the first and by far the largest still that allows cross-chain swaps between Bitcoin and other networks. But switching gears slightly, right? So us at SubQuery, we've recently come in, well, not recently, a few months now, been in Cosmos, in the Cosmos ecosystem. And we're seeing a huge amount of growth right now in Cosmos. A lot of new networks are launching in Cosmos, a lot of new zones are launching. There's a lot of interest from developers out there. You living and breathing in it right now, obviously THORchain is a Cosmos Tendermint-based chain. Why is Cosmos so successful at the moment? Why is it the new thing that developers are flocking towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's they figured out sort of how to do this BFT proof of stake blockchains really early on. So I think they had quite a bit of early mover advantage in that regard. Like they were just the ones that kind of figured it out first. Meanwhile, it took Ethereum like another 2 years to switch over to proof of stake. So it was really the first place that you could go to build a proof of stake blockchain, an app chain. That they kind of invented this concept of the app chain, where programmers who don't have any idea about the underlying cryptography primitives or peering and God, what's the name? Like the peering and gossiping protocols, right? Like Cosmos is basically all of the innovation of the original Bitcoin Satoshi white paper mixed with all of the innovation of BitTorrent, and something like with like a programming layer of something like Stripe, where they just made it super easy for people to drop in and just start writing financial applications using a common tool set. So I think where Cosmos really won was just in that developer usability and the ability to get something up and running off the ground quickly. And for that reason, they had a lot of people launch chains. It's easy to launch a chain, and it's easy to do pretty much anything. I mean, it's I don't really see many other. I don't even see a room for. Basically what I'm just trying to think right now. Like I don't think that you would even need. This might sound crazy, but I don't think that you need anything beyond the smart contracting general purpose computing capability that EVMs, things like Ethereum, Avalanche give you. The pure and like unadulterated security of proof of network chains like UTXOs like Bitcoin, and then like the app chains like Cosmos. I think between those three things, and I mean, this is always like, the history is fraught with people that say we've invented everything we possibly could have, and there's nothing left to invent. But I really do think that like between those three different paradigms, it covers pretty much all the use cases that you would want or need in a cryptocurrency or in a blockchain platform. And so, yeah, I think Cosmos was just kind of like that last layer of giving anyone the ability to create like a sovereign app chain easily.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. And you've found it quite easy to develop on it. What do you think is like looking forward for THORchain? What
It's not
your competition? I
it's not
assume.
easy. It's actually like the way that we use. I mean, most other chains.
What, blockchain development's not
Oh
easy?
God, it's like it's literally the worst thing you could ever imagine. I mean, like most other Cosmos changes will just do like a hard fork whenever they want to upgrade software. So we had to just design an entire way of doing software upgradability just to match the velocity of our project. Like we do it in a different way that no one else does. So it's completely, but it's still like, you know, I mean, it's still better than I think smart contract development, because you can do just way more in terms of capabilities. But sorry, I cut you off. You were saying something else.
No. It's quite interesting actually, because a lot of other app chains are trying to talk up their ability to do runtime upgrades without any forking. And I guess that's right. We've had issues with other Cosmos chains that suddenly just switched from going from chain A to chain B, and it's like, wait, what happened? What happened on that block?
Yeah.
Um,
Their chain, it's like a new
was,
chain. There's no way to upgrade the chain. They're literally hard forking it and creating a new chain. But I mean, like, yeah, there's just that. I think that Cosmos will eventually figure out a way. But when we started, we were really one of the first Cosmos chains ever. And so we kind of just had to solve that problem, like, without waiting. You know, like there's a lot of things like IBC didn't exist when we started out. So I wouldn't call what we do, best practice. I don't really even know what the best practices are for Cosmos in 2023, but what we figured out, something that works, and we just shipped our, release 1.102. And so, we've closed thousands of merge requests. I mean, THORchain is just a massive project from a code base perspective. Every one of our just to put into context, like the scale, most Cosmos chains, they just run their validator, right? Like the Cosmos Hub or Atom, that chain is literally just a bunch of people who, delegate their Atom to validators. Those validators churn in. They just run like the Cosmos application. We run not only the THORchain application, but also the daemons for every other chain. So every node is running n number of other pieces of infrastructure just to be able to validate transactions on THORchain. So everyone's running their own set of that infrastructure. So it's just like from an infrastructure and a code footprint, THORchain is by far the most complex Cosmos chain, and I'm very comfortable with saying that. Like it's by far the most complex implementation of Cosmos.
mm. Would it be fair to say that you look at your competition and you kind of identify centralized exchanges like Binance as your competition more so than Uniswap and SushiSwap and other ones?
Yeah, I think the battle, the overarching theme is decentralized versus centralized, and that. I don't think there's really much of an argument about that, because there isn't only going to be one decentralized winner, right? THORchain is this base infrastructure that works really well for short tail high liquidity assets like Bitcoin, like native Ethereum, like everything else that we support. But when you start getting into the long tail liquidity, like these small tokens that might only exist on Avalanche or something like that, there's not liquidity everywhere. So one of the things that THORchain has really been doing over the past couple months is this concept called DEX aggregation. And it's basically a new feature of THORchain where you can chain together swaps from other dexes too, and then feed it in or out of THORchain to get to the asset that you want. So it's the centralized exchange experience of swapping Bitcoin to like Chainlink on Avalanche, for example. But it's the DEX experience of doing it from your self custody wallet, obviously just with decentralized exchanges rather than depositing it in an account somewhere, right? So, I think that the battle is largely decentralized versus centralized in that regard.
And when people look at that battle, right, people usually think decentralization means a terrible user experience, slow, difficult to understand and use. What's kind of, do you think we're over that now? Like what is the final bastion of difference between THORchain or a decentralized exchange or a decentralized platform and Binance, for example?
I think we're really at a point now where people are going to start realizing how much easier it is to use decentralized exchanges than centralized exchanges. Case in point, and this isn't available on iOS yet, but if you open up Trust Wallet on Android right now and you go to your Bitcoin balance, there's a button there that was never there before. And that's the swap button, and you can swap from Bitcoin to Ethereum to BNB natively in your Trust Wallet without ever leaving Trust, without signing up for anything, without without doing anything really. And so
That KYCing.
yeah. And so what we've realized is like people are going to start using this thing, whether they know that they're using, it could be wrapped up by a UI that is meant to look like a centralized exchange. It could be a centralized exchange that's tapping into liquidity on THORchain. Like there's people are just going to become users of THORchain without really even knowing it. And that's just something that has really started to materialize as a strategy in the past 6 months. And it's a bit of a departure from where we started out, which was like THORchain, and there's a couple dexes that you can use that are building on THORchain, and you got to go on there and like link your wallet, and that can be a bit of a cumbersome experience. Just like the whole wallet connect flow is a known difficult UX pattern for people in Web3. And so with this new strategy of getting adoption and integration directly into wallets, since they already like are basically the touch point between users and their funds, they can easily integrate decentralized swaps in with THORchain, and it's a seamless experience for their users. And so I think a lot of these barriers to entry that we've seen before in terms of DeFi are going to go away. But I do still think we're really far from that. Like there's most users of crypto don't even know about about THORchain, and they don't really know about DeFi because it's it's inherently hard. But I think that we're going to start to see, wallets like Trust start to step up and show people just how easy it can be to custody your own assets and to swap your own assets without having any counterparty risk.
Yeah, the important mental switch on THORchain, I think, is realizing that THORchain is infrastructure, not an app itself. So like you don't just go on THORchain.com and start swapping there, and that's the only place where you can access it. Like your experience is on Binance or Coinbase. The end state of THORchain is that it's this app chain that just trustlessly processes transactions as they come in and out, and anyone can tap into that. And the main people who are using that are these wallets, are the dexes and the centralized exchanges. So any centralized exchange could say like, hey, we need liquidity. Where are we going to source that? They can take it right from THORchain. Any dex can build and say, hey, we're going to use this dex aggregator and it's going to route through THORchain, or right in your wallet where the user experience is already like really nailed down to a T. That's where it's the easiest to say, hey, I'm just going to make a swap real quick from this asset to this asset, like no problem. And it just goes through THORchain. The user doesn't need to know that they're using THORchain or do anything that's related to that. All they need to do is just keep using the apps that they're in, and then these swaps will come to them and people will start using them just because of the convenience, the ease of integration, the trustless nature of it, and that you don't have to ask our permission or anyone's permission to integrate THORchain. You can just start using those pools and have your users make these swaps. So just thinking of THORchain more as the infrastructure rather than some kind of product or app or website in itself is like an important mental switch, I think, to get the right picture.
And that's why we're really excited to work with THORchain, right? Because we build infrastructure as well. We build an indexer, and for the next set of applications to be built on top of THORchain, to be really user friendly, to be able to bring in the next 1,000 people to use a decentralized exchange like THORchain over something like Binance, they're going to need a really good user interface. And so we're really keen to and happy to work closely with you guys to provide that indexing layer to anyone that wants to build on THORchain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of need for block explorers, for people that are building arbitrage bots, for people that are building dexes, for people that are doing analytics. We've already seen just how some I mean, basically, since we're the major infrastructure provider in terms of like the APIs for most of the ecosystem, we can kind of see how all these different products that are building on THORchain are using our APIs. And I'll tell you that it's not standardized in any way. Some people are just like absolutely battering us. Some people are like looking up, each transaction just like, one by one. Some of them are smart enough to like request the whole block and decode the transactions. But it's just like, yeah, there's definitely a need not only within THORchain and but within like the broader, Cosmos and Tendermint ecosystem to have some sort of data indexing layer because when they were building Cosmos in Tendermint, they weren't really thinking in mind, about how are we going to make this thing like usable by consumers. They were more interested in saying what is the most distilled feature set that we need to create this to basically to have this like Byzantine fault tolerant proof of stake system. So when you query the Cosmos APIs that like you kind of just get out of the box, nothing is in a readable format. They're using this weird encoding, the amino encoding stuff that they had to like deprecate because that ended up being an awful idea. And they're like, yeah, everyone can just use protobufs, and it's just like no one wants to use protobufs, like so
No
it's
one wants to deal with protobuffs.
no one wants to deal with that stuff. So it's like they got a lot of stuff right in terms of like how to make the most like performant and expressive model for building blockchains, but they really missed on the just like composability and usability of the APIs. But again, like that's not, I don't fault them for that. That wasn't like the intention, but it just definitely leaves like a big opportunity for people like in organizations like SubQuery to come in and offer those things to everywhere from the end users to the builders building on top of these chains. So I think where you guys are positioned is really awesome.
Well, thank you guys. We're kind of running out of time. I'm going to open up the floor to any questions from the audience here. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand and I can invite you on. But I really enjoyed talking. I think it's quite interesting to hear about the different ways people are kind of trying to do things, like whether it's arbitrage blocks and all doing these inefficient queries to get the information. That's one of the best things about these decentralized platforms, these smart contract based platforms, is that you can kind of get whatever data you want out of them rather than having to conform to a certain API that an exchange gives you, for example. So it's kind of like you have the Pandora's box in terms of whatever you want, you can build it.
Yeah, they had that whole like CCXT is like the programming library that like just wraps every centralized exchange just to give people like a unified programming layer for interacting with centralized exchanges. Cosmos is kind of that unified programming language or programming model that we think is going to essentially garner the most adoption going forward. And yeah, just in terms of, I just want a piece of advice for you guys, like if it's wanted. But I think SubQuery, if you guys like positioned yourself sort of as the block explorer for every Cosmos project, kind of the way that like Etherscan white labels themselves to like Snowtrace and to BSC scan, like those, like all of those chains are paying Etherscan a fuck ton of money to be able to essentially do what you guys could do, which is just index all the block data and then display it in like a user interface that's familiar. And I think that if you like, there's definitely, I haven't seen anyone solve this problem yet, but if you guys could become like the Etherscan for just thinking about products that you could build on top of an API like SubQuery, I would certainly be interested in that. And I would if you guys come out with it, we would be happy to basically add that to our our list of supported block explorers. So I think that's definitely an area of future exploration for our partnership.
Yeah, we looked into that earlier this year, actually, because for another ecosystem, for Polkadot, actually, because there's a lot of new substrate-based chains that wanted their own kind of, bare bones explorer just to help them develop and build out their chain. But yeah, I will. We have some information about that, so I'll send that through to you, Pluto.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So
well,
how can we
everyone.
access the THORchain like index information on SubQuery? Would you mind like quickly going into that?
Yeah, sure. So we have published a quick start guide that shows takes you from knowing nothing about SubQuery and THORchain to having a running project that indexes. I'm trying to remember exactly what it does index. It indexes. Let me bring it up. It indexes all deposit messages on THORchain. So every single deposit made on THORchain is indexed in the sample project. And that's on our documentation website, academy.subquery.network. If you go under the left-hand side, under Quick Start Guides, you'll find it there. We'll be updating our homepage as well on the Academy website to make note of it as well. But it's really simple to start developing with THORchain. It's like 3 files that you edit, and after running editing those 3 files, you essentially get a running project working away. It's pretty cool. Very easy to do, all in TypeScript. You don't have to learn any extremely crazy programming languages. It's easy enough that anyone can do it. So yeah, check it out if you haven't already.
Nice. Yeah, that is awesome.
So guys, thank you very much for joining us today in the Spaces. Thank you very much for teaching me a lot about different decentralized protocols, bridges, swapping mechanisms. It's a real wild west out there in terms of DeFi, what we're building now, and I feel like we're just getting to that point where it's becoming easier and better to use these DeFi protocols than using these centralized ones. We're now getting to this kind of feature parity and user experience parity soon. So I'm looking forward to that day.
Definitely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys, and enjoy your evening. Enjoy your holiday. Enjoy Christmas if you celebrate that. Try not to drink too much. Try not to eat too much. Have fun wherever you are around the world. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and be safe and enjoy your time with family.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Happy holidays.